Welcome back to PIHOA Network, the home of Africa. Today, we are diving into the powerful journey of Senegal, a country that has often been called one of Africa's most stable democracies. Senegal's post-independence story is filled with twists, tension, and triumph. Let's take the journey together. Before colonization, Senegal was part of powerful West African empires like Ghana and Jolof. Islam arrived in the 11th century, shaping its religious and cultural identity. European contact began in the 15th century, and by the late 1800s, Senegal was central to France's colonial empire. Unlike many colonies, Senegalese in key cities like Dakar and Saint Louis gained French citizenship and political exposure. Notably, Blaise Diagne became the first Black African elected to the French National Assembly in 1914, giving Senegal a political edge towards independence. After World War II, the global push for decolonization reached a peak, and Senegalese leaders seized the moment. Lamine Gueye led the charge to restore full French citizenship rights for African subjects, marking a pivotal legal victory. Meanwhile, Léopold Sédar Senghor, a scholar, poet, and philosopher, began crafting a vision for independence that blended African identity with democratic ideals. By 1958, Senegal became an autonomous republic within the French community, after a referendum overwhelmingly supported by the electorate. While this gave the country limited self-rule, it was a stepping stone. The following year, 1959, Senegal joined French Sudan in forming the Mali Federation, hoping to present a united front for full independence. However, tensions between the two leaderships, particularly over the centralization of power, caused friction. These disagreements led Senegal to withdraw from the federation. Therefore, on August 20, 1960, the National Assembly proclaimed Senegal's full independence. Léopold Senghor became president, and Mamadou Dia assumed the role of prime minister. Senegal, with a newly adopted constitution that included a dual executive structure, had officially become a sovereign republic. The country's journey from colonial subject to independent state was now underway. President Léopold Senghor and Prime Minister Mamadou Dia, Senegal's two founding leaders, shared power under a dual executive system, but their visions for the country's future quickly diverged. Dia, a staunch socialist, pushed for aggressive reforms to break away from Senegal's colonial economic structures. His policies included nationalizing key industries, particularly peanut production, the country's main export, and reducing foreign economic influence. Senghor, however, preferred a cautious, more gradualist approach, fearing that such rapid change could destabilize the fledgling republic and alienate key allies, including France. In December 1962, the conflict came to a head. The National Assembly, dominated by Senghor's allies, prepared a vote of censure against Dia's government, declaring the move unconstitutional under emergency conditions. Dia ordered the assembly building sealed and several deputies detained. Senghor acted swiftly. With military backing, he had Dia and 4 of his ministers arrested. French authorities reportedly warned they would intervene if Senghor was removed, highlighting the geopolitical stakes. The fallout was dramatic, and in March 1963, a constitutional referendum was held, and Senegal adopted a new constitution that abolished the prime minister position entirely. Senghor emerged with full executive powers, officially becoming both head of state and head of government. Despite the crisis, Senegal avoided widespread violence, setting a precedent for legalism and institutional continuity in future political transitions. With full executive control following the 1963 constitutional reform, President Leopold Sédar Senghor embarked on a mission to shape a stable and culturally rich nation. He implemented a philosophy known as African socialism, blending traditional communal values with modern state-led development. His government prioritized education, linguistic diversity, and cultural expression, helping forge a strong national identity. In 1966, Senghor declared his party, the Senegalese Progressive Union, UPS, creating a one-party state. While this move restricted political pluralism, Senghor maintained a relatively moderate and intellectual approach to governance. However, social unrest peaked in 1968 when students at the University of Dakar protested over economic hardship and limited freedoms. Workers soon joined the protests, leading to violent clashes and a temporary closure of the university. Senghor responded by declaring a state of emergency, but he also engaged in negotiations, granting wage increases and reopening institutions, balancing repression with reform. Senghor reinstated the role of Prime Minister in 1970 and appointed Abdou Diouf as his successor. This laid the groundwork for one of the first peaceful transitions of power in post-colonial Africa. On December 31, 1980, Senghor did what very few African leaders had done. He voluntarily stepped down. Diouf became president the next day, carrying on many of Senghor's policies, but slowly opening up political space. Diouf introduced multi-party reforms and tackled rising challenges like economic decline and tensions with Mauritania. The Senegambian Confederation was launched in 1982, but dissolved in 1989. Still, Senegal remained politically intact. Meanwhile, in the opposition trenches stood Abdoulaye Wade, a lawyer and political activist who had been challenging the system since the 1970s. Jailed multiple times, Wade remained a symbol of democratic resistance. After 26 years in opposition, Wade finally won the 2000 election. It was a moment of national pride, the first peaceful transfer of power in Senegal's independent history. Wade's presidency began with energy and reform. A new constitution in 2001 promised checks and balances. He launched grand projects, including the African Renaissance Monument, a towering statue that symbolized a new era. But disillusionment soon set in. Accusations of corruption, nepotism, and authoritarianism mounted. Wade's attempt to run for a third term in 2012 sparked mass protests. He was defeated by Macky Sall, a former ally turned opponent. Sall brought development. His emerging Senegal plan modernized infrastructure and improved energy access, but democracy started to erode. Opposition leaders, including Khalifa Sall and Ousmane Sonko, were jailed. Electoral laws were amended, making it harder for challengers to compete. Protests erupted. In 2023, Sall refused to say whether he would seek a third term, adding fuel to the fire. And to make it worse, in 2024, he postponed elections, triggering Senegal's first major constitutional crisis. The Constitutional Council ruled the postponement illegal. Elections were back on, and in a stunning turn, Diomaye Faye, fresh out of prison, won the presidency with 54% of the vote. Faye, backed by the popular Sonko and a fired-up youth movement, promised change. He appointed Sonko as prime minister and immediately set to work. His main aim is to tackle corruption, reclaim national sovereignty, and replace the CFA franc. He even dissolved parliament and called new elections, winning a majority in November 2024. Senegal's story is far from over, but one thing is clear: it is a country that fights for its democracy. From Blaise Diagne to Diomaye Faye, from colonial domination to people-powered elections, Senegal remains a symbol of what is possible when courage meets conviction.